Hello everybody, and welcome to the last dying embers of autumn. Looks a bit of a stretch that way to call what's remaining autumn, but it is Wednesday the 17th of November, which I should know because my wedding anniversary was yesterday, and there is still some colour, believe it or not. Autumn has been late this year, very late, and that's a bit of a relief for me because I spent lots of it in places without trees, places like Cornwall. I was in Iceland last week, which was fantastic, but I can't help but feel I've probably missed the best of the colour. So today I've come out in the hope of trying to kind of make up for that a little bit. Also, last winter these trousers, I don't know if you can see these, they fit me perfectly, whereas today I had to jump into them. So I'm going to walk around quite quickly. So the other reason I'm going to walk quite quickly is the fact that I keep forgetting it's winter now and sunset is at 4:15. So last couple of times I've been out, I've not really given myself anywhere near enough time. So get on with it. More nice colour, but again, it's not a picture. Well, this scene is worth taking a photo of, I think. It's my kind of scene. You couldn't get more my kind of scene, I don't think. Basically, there's a human element surrounded by nature. The human element being the cottage that I'm actually not sure that you can really see from where you're sat on my salty tripod, which I haven't washed properly since getting back from Iceland. But yeah, it's a beautiful spot, which, to be honest, actually, I think probably peaked a couple of weeks ago. You know, there was nice light. I mean, it was quite backlit. The sun was behind the hill, but it still was glowing. And as I say, there was nice autumnal foliage, certainly on the right-hand side, and it just looked quite a lot nicer than it does now. So yes, sadly, a little bit late for another opportunity at this one, but it doesn't particularly matter because there are other shots to be had up there. It's a lake, and I'm hoping that it's a still lake. We'll see. Before we go to said lake, let me try and talk you through some of the perils of trying to shoot this lovely cottage. Now, as you might be able to see on this gate, it says private, which basically means that we've got to stay this side of the fence. And you can't really shoot the cottage from here, this side of the fence, because, well, as you can see, all these trees obscure the cottage pretty much completely. So naturally, the thing to do is to walk this way, and you start thinking to yourself, well, maybe I'll just get a straight on shot. But the problem with that is you become obscured by this with a straight on shot. I mean, you could step slightly this way, but then you're not completely straight on to that door. And also, these trees just here obscure the trees in the background, which at least a couple of weeks ago were lighting up in wonderful colour. So that's not really an option. So then you think, right, I'll go down this way and get a shot of the other side of the cottage. But as you might be able to see now, I'm going downhill. And what that means is that when you get to a place that you can see the cottage from, you've got the wall in front of the cottage, so you can't actually see anything below about, I don't know, halfway up the door. So that's not ideal either. So basically what I think is best is to shoot through this little bush up here. I say bush, it's just a collection of branches now. All the leaves have fallen off pretty much, but a couple of weeks ago there were lovely orange leaves all over this bush, and what's best, I think, is to try and find a gap in those leaves to frame the cottage. So yes, that's what I decided to do for the most part a couple of weeks back. Didn't film it though, did I? Completely forgot. Muppet. You see that robin that was on my tripod? Also, I don't know if you can hear this. This upsets me, look. It's not too bad actually, but there's lots of sand in this, lots of black volcanic sand. I think this actually needs about half a dozen showers and maybe a pressure wash. Get all the sand out. Well, you might be able to see through there that there is a nice reflection. So a bit further down this path, we should be able to get to that and see if there are any shots. In the meantime, as you can see, I'm using my tripod to take a nice shot of this scene. And yes, I'm using a tripod and talking glowingly about showering one and caring for it, basically, which I imagine you probably didn't think you'd hear on this channel. The trouble is, even if you despise using tripods, as I do, it doesn't make using them, or buying them, good ones at least, any cheaper. So it does pay to care for them and wash them and such. Get the salt water off and the sand and all that kind of thing. I feel like an idiot doing it, but it's got to be done. Anyway, while I'm stood here using a tripod and working at a snail's pace, I thought it would be a good time to talk about exposure, because I made a video, it's probably about 6 weeks ago now, where I went to an island not too far away from here, an island that I love going to shoot a video about this little lens here, which is my 50mm prime, which I absolutely love. And I spent an hour on that island taking photos, and in the comments of that video, lots of people said that some of the images looked a bit overexposed. And I think that's for two reasons. Number one, they were a bit overexposed. Number two, they were set against a backdrop of GoPro footage, which wasn't overexposed. It's like HDR and looks a bit darker. And so those two paired together looked a bit odd, I think. But it got me thinking about the concept of exposure and correct exposure. Now, the problem, I think, a lot of the time when we talk about exposure is we consider it quite a binary thing. Like, we think an underexposed shot is a shot that a camera tells us is underexposed. Or we look at a histogram, for example, and if all the information's on the left, we think the shot is underexposed. If it's all on the right, we think a shot is overexposed. However, as far as I'm concerned, exposure is not quite that simple. And at the risk of starting waffling ridiculously here, I'll try and keep things fairly succinct. If you are an action sports photographer in cold weather, typically, you will be more than familiar with the fact that if you're shooting in snow, you have to overexpose by, I don't know, a stop, 2 stops in some instances, because otherwise the camera will see the snow and will expose for the snow, and you'll just end up with a really dark shot. Likewise, if you're a street photographer, a lot of the time you'll want to use things like shadows to frame your subjects. And if the camera is exposing for the shadows, you can't really do that anywhere near as well. Now, the reason I say this, and the whole point of this, is that exposure is all to do with what the photographer wants it to be. And a correct exposure is the exposure that a photographer deems correct, not the exposure that the camera deems correct. And this isn't about my shots the other week and me getting concerned that people think they're overexposed. People can think whatever they want about my photos, and they were a bit overexposed, and I kind of wanted them to be because I wanted it to look like a nice bright scene. But the important message, I think, is that exposure is down to you, not the camera. And if you want to evoke a certain feeling in your scene, if you want it to feel light and airy, then overexposing by a stop or two is not the end of the world. And similarly, of course, if you want a scene to feel kind of dark and moody, and you want to invoke that feeling by crushing your shadows, then there's absolutely no problem with that, just because your camera tells you that you're overexposed. So yeah, I thought that was an important point to make, because I think all too often, lots of people, particularly beginners, listen to the cameras too much. And I mean, the cameras don't make a noise, but you know what I mean? They pay attention to what the camera says too much, when actually it's all your decisions. Anyway, at the danger of waffling on way too much, here is a scene shot at the right exposure, at least according to the camera, and then 1 stop underexposed, and then 1 stop overexposed. And all of these shots, I think, are completely passable, even though only one of them is correctly exposed, at least according to the camera. And they all evoke a slightly different feeling in the scene, and can be used to different effects, I think. And that's just a very simple demonstration of the fact that you don't need to listen to the camera as far as exposure goes. And in fact, often actually, you need to actively not listen to the camera or pay attention to the camera. I keep saying listen. The camera, as we've said, doesn't talk. So yeah, anyway, a little chat about exposure there. Probably not making any sense, but something I've been thinking about the last few days, so I thought I'd talk about it. Right, let's go and try and find some other photos. In fact, actually, before we move on, I'll just make sure that I have actually nailed this shot. And yes, I am still using the tripod. Herein lies the problem, I would say, of shooting full frame as opposed to micro four thirds, because I'm having to shoot at f9, which is giving me a shutter speed of half a second. Whereas on my G9, I could have just shot the scene at f4.5 and be done with it. But hey ho. Oh, this is better. This is better. Okay. Still can't shoot that way because of the sun, but I might be able to get away with shooting this way. And I'd love to do that without a tripod, but I will still use one, I think. Gently in the water as not to cause any ripples. Okay. All right, 2-second timer. One more, come on, one more. Well, I had grand designs on trying to get a couple more shots of the trees and the path and stuff, but I walked past the reflection again and the light is fading fast, and I just thought, oh, do you know what? Make hay while the sun shines. And the point is that it's not shining, but you get what I mean. See that big tree in the background? I'm just sticking that in the middle of my frame and yeah, just shooting straight at it basically. Don't know how the shot's going to turn out, but fingers crossed. Let's have a look. F8, ISO 100, half a second. Any good? Anyway, thank you for watching me potter around this afternoon. I thought that there was a chance I might not get any photos today, so I'm quite pleased to have got a few, and it's been a nice, calm, still afternoon out. Also, a huge thank you to the sponsor of this week's video, Skillshare. So as many of you who've watched this channel for a while will know, Skillshare is a fantastic online learning platform for all kinds of different creative pursuits. And there are classes in business development, creative writing, photography, how to look after your houseplants, and I've taken classes in pretty much all those things on Skillshare this year, but my favourite, I'd have to say, is the classes that I took on Adobe InDesign while I was making the latest book, because many of you told me that designing books in Photoshop was stupid, and you were right. It saved me loads of time, so thank you to you, and a big thank you to Skillshare. And yeah, if you consider yourself a creative person, which I assume you do based on the fact that you're watching a photography channel, then I would definitely recommend checking out Skillshare. And the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in my description will get access to a 1-month free trial. So I'd highly recommend doing that because, as I say, thousands of classes in all kinds of different creative pursuits. And yeah, it's been a big help to me. I've just ruined the reflection by standing in the water. Oops. I should probably go because I think once again I've forgotten my head torch. See you next time if I don't get lost.